Well, howdy, it's RBB. Today I am just sort of playing around. I wanted to go back and forth between Fresco and Sketch and Photoshop, and the more I was playing and sort of trying to set things up ahead of time, I realized, it makes just as much sense to sort of show it in real time. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm starting here in Fresco. And we've looked at Fresco before. You can look and see there are some past videos. One of the things I think that is super cool about Fresco is that, let's see, it's very easy. Like, it's incredibly easy. It's almost like paint or something. But what's super awesome about it, in case you didn't remember what I showed you before, is that you can use different kinds of brushes within the same document. Now, if you want to draw like an Illustrator and use a brush or the pen tool, which is a better tool to use, that's a vector image. And then if you're working in Photoshop, of course, that's a raster image. It's pixel based. But here in Fresco, you can do both. So you can have one layer that is vectors and another layer that is rasters. And we won't go too deep into this because we have seen this before, but just showing you that these pixel brushes here, there are so many of them. And what I think I'm going to do today in playing is just make some sort of pretty patterns and then in Photoshop turn them into patterns that we can use however we want to. We can use as backgrounds, or we can use as probably layer styles. That was one of the more popular videos, was people working in layer styles. So with all these different brushes, and I mean, it's not Photoshop, right? There's not thousands of brushes, but there's a lot, and you do some cool things. So if you want to draw more and you want to draw like comics, there's different types of brushes and things that would be a pain in the tuchus to try and do yourself, like halftones and cross-hatching. Now, I don't love the halftones, and here's why. Because when you use the halftone, I'm going to switch to my stylus here. When you use the halftone brush, let's see how big is this? Okay, I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger. I wish that the size of the brush was relative to the size of the dots, but the pattern is sort of stuck. So you can see that? I'm really just covering more of it in one swish. So if I'm doing this, I'm making these halftone patterns, and now the lighter I press with my stylus, sort of the lighter the smaller, but really it's just less coverage, and they get this weird sort of specklediness around them. Now with Fresco, you can adjust your brushes. Like I can change the smoothing, which isn't going to change the fuzziness. It's just going to change the smoothness of my movement. And then you do have these brush settings, which I've farted around a little bit with this to see if I can get rid of some of that fuzziness, but not really. Really what kind of happens is it's just like exactly what spacing is doing. It's just spacing out the instances of the round brush in the same pattern. So it's kind of cool, but you can make this sort of neat halftone pattern, and the lighter you press, the sort of smaller they look. So it takes a little practice to kind of get a halftone pattern that's maybe what you want, but it's kind of cool. All right, so I'm going to step back a couple times. Okay, and let's look at some of these other brushes real quick while we're playing. I like the crosshatch one a lot. It's a little goofy for crosshatching, at least it's not how I crosshatch. But for example, let me show you. Let's say I have an ink pen, brush pen, and I have a circle. Oh, it shouldn't be that big. Okay, there we go. That's crazy. And let's go to that cross-hatching brush. So if I go back to comics and crosshatch, how big is this? Gigantic. Okay, let's make that smaller. You can make these crosshatches smaller pretty easy, and then really basically like shade this in with crosshatching. And again, the lighter you push with your stylus, it is somewhat pressure sensitive. But while that's a little goofy, I think one of the neat things you can do is, remember, you got this little sort of magic button in Fresco that if I click it one time, the blue dot in the center turns the brush I'm using into an eraser of that same brush. So see, Like if I went around the outside here, I could basically erase in cross-hatching. So if I needed to clean up something or thin this out a little bit, I'm sort of like reverse cross-hatching. Now, if you, well, we haven't done it yet. I'll talk about vectors in a second. But so I could smooth out this circle some. Okay, and it gives some pretty cool textures and patterns. So that's pretty awesome. All right, and there's tons of other ones. Like I said, we're not going to get into this. Is not going to be forever a Fresco tutorial here, but there's lots of different ones you can do, including some really weird ones, like these cheesy, look, it's like noodles. Ooh, cheesy noodles. I have not yet figured out a way to change the colors. Like, let's say I love this look, but I want it to be pink or purple. If I change the colors, I just lose, it just becomes a brush that size, and I don't have that cool cheesy noodles anymore. So I haven't quite figured out, and it may not be a way in Fresco to be able to change those colors, but there's lots of these super cool weird brushes, maple leaves, woo! Of course you can change sizes and tweak all those and make them how you want them. Rainbow strings. I think this one's cool. This is the chain. And if any of you have ever tried to draw a chain, or like I like to draw robots and monsters and things, and chains are a pain in the tuchus. So being able to change the size of this chain is pretty cool. So I can have like bigger links and smaller links, and I think that's pretty neat. So yeah, those are all a little gimmicky, but they're kind of cool. All right, so I'm going to back to another cool thing here is I need a new layer here. So if I click on my layer, I can clear this layer, I can delete the layer. I'm just going to clear it rather than make a new one. These guys right here, this is the live brushes, which basically is like painting, and I can do watercolor or oil. And there's not a ton of them, but it's pretty neat. The watercolor brushes are super wet and squishy. I think that's a technical term, right? They're wet and squishy. That is definitely an element of art, right? So see how they sort of continue to bleed? And if I were to change and do another color here, they would, see that? They bleed into each other, which is pretty cool. So I could, again, make some kind of cool background. Maybe it's just grungy, maybe it's monster skin or whatever. I could make some kind of cool texture-y type pattern. So that's pretty cool. Let's erase that, clear that layer. Yeah, watercolor, oil, basic watercolor. Okay, whoosh. I think that's not very watercolory. I can also, how much water, like how watery is it? See how it's filled out? I think it's so cool. Let's try another color. Let's do something like that shouldn't really blend very nicely. Look at that. That's so cool. Boop. That's pretty neat. So while these are kind of gimmicky, the flow and the action of some of the things like watercolor work better than in a lot of painting programs. Now, their oils don't exactly work like oils because I paint in very thin layers, you know, sort of that Dutch Old Masters where it starts out with the brown and white and then the dead layer and then the glazing over it. And you can't really do that here, but that's okay. You can only ask so much from basically a free program. So clear that layer. And then the thing that I think is the super coolest is the vector brushes, which allow you to draw in a vector layer with what we want to draw with in Illustrator. Now in Illustrator, I always tell my students who are learning Illustrator, don't use the brush tool because you're not really learning to make vectors. And if you're really making vectors, you'd have a point here, you'd have a Bezier curve, a Bezier curve, a Bezier curve, a Bezier curve, and that just blows some people's minds, which sort of scares people away from using vectors, which I think is sort of sad. Or they do use it crappy and use the brush tool. But here, you are totally doing that. You're totally drawing with the brush tool in a very organic way. But it just allows you to add it like this is a vector layer and this is a pixel layer. So as soon as I started drawing in vector, it made a new vector layer. Some of the things that I think are really cool is if I have some lines that overlap each other, back to my cool little magic gizmo thing here. That turns my brush into an eraser, okay? So whoop-de-doo, okay? But if I click it again and I get this guy on the outside, anything that's overlapping, like see how this line sticks out past here, I can draw through that and it'll delete it. So if I want to have really cool edges here, like this guy, boop, or this little edge right there, or this one, okay? You can take off those overlapping edges. So you can clean up your vector drawings really easy, and that is so cool. So when you're drawing, you don't have to be careful about stopping right at the edge. You can have your lines going, you know, if I was going to make a box or something, I don't have to worry about making perfect edges because I can just come in here with this super cool magic tool and be like boop, 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 boop. It helps if you say boop. My students never believed me, but now you've got perfect edges, which is very cool. Okay, so anyway, again, just sort of playing today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this layer right here. So I click on it, delete it, and let's just play with some of these crazy brushes, some of these guys here. And then we're going to take this stuff into Photoshop. So playing with some of these super kooky brushes, like, let's do, yeah, like this rainbow Surratt is pretty cool. Let's see, I think these are a little too goofy. Let's go with something sort of splattery, maybe. Painting, what are those? Let's see. Canvas brush, chunky brush. There's a good bunch of them here. Impressionist brush, scratchy bristles, Surratt. So here we get sort of, now if you're not familiar with, you know, art history or who that is, Surratt did that that Saturday on the banks of the Grand Jatte, the one with all the dots and the lady sitting there in the lake and the person with the umbrella. Yeah, you know those. So it's an impressionist painter, and by having these different colors, you're going to get those sort of spotty lookingness. So here I can turn down the flow. Okay. I can also change the smoothing, of course, which is going to just straighten out my curves. And then with these guys here, I can change out like sort of the amount of spots. The blending mode, which is pretty cool because right now they're just going over top of each other. But if you remember our video on blending modes, this is normal blending mode. So one color is just going right over top of another color. So whatever is done first is on the bottom and then it just moves its way up. If we change that blending mode to all the blending modes, okay, all the normal blending modes that are here, let's go to like overlay because that sort of blends. So if we go to overlay, let's pick a color that would be pretty dramatic, like a pinky purple color or something. Something that would be pretty obnoxious. Now, when I draw over these, it's like, oh, well, it went behind. No, it actually is interacting with the blue and the orange and the green with some color math. So whatever the color math is for the blending mode, lighter and darker colors behave differently. But I could grab like a darker green, and they're going, it's not drawing behind, you can see. So if I go right here on top, bloop, 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 you can see it's reacting with the layers underneath. And sometimes it has to do with how light they are, how dark they are. So a lighter color might show up on top. But let's say we love this, okay? Let's move on to what I was saying we were going to do today. So I could play with several different blending modes and just sort of, do we need any other color in there? I feel like we need something warmer up at the top here. I know, everybody's favorite, orange. Why do people not like orange? I have one of my best friends growing up, her favorite color is and always has been brown, which I think is really interesting, and she's not colorblind. Okay, so let's say I love this funky pattern right here. If I am loving this, remember that Fresco is tied directly to Photoshop. So if you have an Adobe, what do you call it? An Adobe subscription, whatever it's called. As soon as we leave here to go to Photoshop, it's going to automatically save and be in our CC library. Now, one thing I don't love about this, unless it could very well just be me and I haven't figured it out yet, is I can't figure out how to, like, maybe I don't want this. There's not a close without saving, or let me make another one. Pretty much as soon as I leave here, if I say home, like looking for some way to close it, or even if I just close it up here, it automatically saves. So when I say go home, like let's start over, it automatically saved this document to my CC library. Okay, so yeah, it is what it is. Let's go to Photoshop real quick. So if we go to Photoshop and we look over in patterns, remember over here in our sort of attribute type stuff, color swatches, gradients, patterns, all that. If you don't see your patterns, you can find it under the Windows menu where all of our stuff is. Okay, so patterns are open. Here's my patterns, and what's amazing is that what I create in Fresco is already saved in Photoshop. So let me see. So it's already saved there and should be in my sort of CC libraries type thing. So you can see I've played and made lots of different ones here. Let's go to Photoshop and okay, of course, it's not doing exactly what I want it to. Where are my patterns? I want to look into, oh, let me look at my libraries here. A little bit of a lag. I want to look at my libraries called Saved from Capture, because that's where, for whatever reason, they all seem to be saving. Patterns from Capture. Oh, now you're just going to make a big old fibber out of me. If we go to Open Recently, oh, you know what? Let's do it this way. If we go to Open Recent, you will see that that document that we just made right here is it's in the CC libraries. It sort of counts as like a Photoshop layer, PSDC. So I don't know if that's Photoshop Photoshop document capture, but there it is. Okay. So this is why it wasn't automatically saving there. It was automatically saving as a Photoshop document, but not automatically as a pattern. We're going to save this as a pattern. So back to having a pattern open. Okay, if we want to say add a new pattern, we simply click on the little plus right down here, and we can name this. So I'm going to call this Rainbow Spots. Spots. You can always tell it's mine because I spell everything wrong. Okay, Rainbow Spots. I'm going to leave it like that. Okay, so there's my new rainbow spots. Great, lovely. Okay, let's go to something like a full sheet, document like this, and let's type something in. Let's type in beauty. Beautiful. Over here, my properties. I can change that. Let's see. Move that guy here in the center. Let's select it. Let's go ahead and make that bigger so we can see what we're doing, and maybe some kind of more interesting. I'm going to make this, we're going to use those colored dots. So I wanted to find something that the colored dots would look really good on. Let's do, won't go crazy. Let's just go with, we'll just do Arial rounded. Okay. There we go. It's big enough. Everything's great. We can change kerning and all that good stuff. We don't care about the color. Whoops. We don't care about the color because we are going to use our layer styles. So I'll get rid of that thing I just accidentally clicked on. Here's my beauty layer. Remember to bring up the layer styles, that secret, double secret not squirrel thing. I click right here in this open spot, and up pops the layer styles menu, which is like secret knowledge, right? It's like knowing the code word to get into the speakeasy. And we can do all kinds of things, bevel and emboss, all the cool things we've done in the past, and make it look 3D, things like that. We can add a drop shadow. Everything's lovely. Let's make that not so gigantic. Maybe not so big. Okay, there we go. And I don't know why it's dark red. I guess because it's contrasting the green. But okay, so we've seen all this before. You can add all kinds of textures and glows and all that kind of good stuff and dial it in with all the parameters. But let's jump right down to pattern overlay, which normally we kind of ignore because generally the patterns that come with this suck. The patterns that come with Photoshop really are kind of lame. But once you start making patterns, you're going to have like a library out the wazoo. So if you recall, in Fresco, when I was playing the other day, I made a pattern that sort of looked like snow and maybe some holly because it's early December. And so I was like, oh, let's do like Christmassy. So I did this holly looking one, and I also made this grungy looking one. It's back to Photoshop. if I go to my patterns, all the patterns that I've made in Fresco and or captured with Capture are right here. So here's the new spotty one I just made. Okay, that's pretty cool. But I don't have to use it straight out of the box. I can change the blending mode, because remember it's green underneath. I could change the blending mode. I can change the opacity so I can see the green through it. I can change the angle. I can move this around. Remember, this is basically putting a big square pattern on it. So I can grab that and move it around and sort of let it swim until I like I kind of like the blue swish through this. Let's see if I can get a little bit more on the Y. I don't know. So yeah, just think about what's leading your eye. Okay, that's pretty cool because I've got sort of that fuchsia look going this way and the blue going this way. I guess I should say magenta. All right, so there's my pattern. I can change the angle. I can also change the scale. I can make basically how many times is this thing repeating. Is it going to repeat a bunch of times? Will it repeat just a few times? So I can change sort of the scale of my spots, zooming in or out. Okay, and if we say okay, there's this awesome, look what we just did. I mean, that's pretty cool. And if we wanted to, if I go back into my After Effects here, and I'm like, you know what? I love this. This is called Beauty right here. If I went to New Styles and I wanted to save it, and I called this Rainbow Beauty. Beauty. Did I spell it wrong? Yep. Oh, look at that. Rainbow's Beauty. You know what? Beauty. It would help if I looked at my keyboard sometimes. Okay, and say, okay, so now this Rainbow Beauty is saved in my styles menu here. There are these different styles that I've made for whatever reason, like this chromy looking one or this goldish looking one, whatever's going on here. And then I also have this one I just made. Boop. So there it is. It's saved in my layer styles so I can use it later. So one of the layer styles, one of the things I made the other day when I made this grungy one, and I just made it a fill layer by dragging that pattern onto my work surface here, and it came in as a fill pattern, so it just filled in the whole thing. I could do this several times and blend layers and things like that. What I did here was I made this one a tileable texture, which again, you can go back and look at another video. So what we did, I can show you how we did it. It's already done, but I can do it again. If I go to Filter, Other, Offset, I know this is 500 by 500. It must be rasterized. Oh, it's a vector. That's so cool. So it can be made bigger or smaller. It can be made bigger or smaller to be able to tile. So I changed it to 250 pixels up and down, 200 pixels side to side. And the reason why it still looks good is because it was already tileable. But now it's double tileable. It's awesome, okay? You may see when you do this, so there'll be these weird lines right here. Go back and watch that video on making a tileable texture. And then you can just blend and smooth and smoosh and all those types of things. But now this is a tileable texture, meaning that if I were to select this all, so Control A, Control C, let's come back over here to this guy, let's make a new layer. If I were to paste this and paste a couple of these, if I put these next to each other, they're going to tile without any seams. Now, you want to be a little careful and make sure that your pattern itself doesn't make a seam. But if we zoom in, you'll see there's no, see this spot, even though that's on the edge, it's finished on the right of this one, right? And so there's no obvious edge. What we do see repeating is these patterns just because the human eye is really good at picking out patterns. But if you were to just look at this area right here, it's very hard to see where is the seam. Where does it actually repeat? Like looking at your shower curtain, you ever try and figure out exactly where the pattern is? Yeah. So that's a tileable texture, which is pretty cool. I can use that, of course, in a background like this. Look, even close, because these are vectors. Look at these letters back here. They never get pixelated because it's a vector image. That's just super cool. All right, let me get rid of these guys here. Yeah, as I said, just sort of playing, but the things you can do with texture layers from Fresco to Photoshop. This one right here, I think this is kind of cool. This one I was playing with, and it's one of the weird ones. It's one of the weird brushes. Rainbow Row, is that it? Nope, that's not it. It's like Rainbow Dots or something, but it was kind of dumb, like as it was. Let's see, what is this one called? Rainbow something. Anyway, I didn't particularly like it, and so like I changed the spacing, and then depending on the pressure, it either was real small or real big. And so I was literally holding my stylus between my hands, and like, you know how like you roll back and forth to like make a snake out of clay. I was doing that. I was like touching it down and making a little swirl, and it was making these big fat rainbow swirls into these little things, and I thought that was pretty cool. So just having a good old time. I also made that same day, let's see, hide that one. I also made this one with, this was what I was talking about the halftone. These are halftone lines. So yeah, it's got these weird kind of scratchy bits, but it sort of makes it look more printed, which is kind of neat. Okay, so again, when I saved this, when it opened up in Photoshop, it opened up with these layers. So even though I didn't have to save it as layers or anything like that, it just saved that way. So when I open this up in Photoshop, all three of those layers will be there. So do what you want. Make whatever kind of patterns that you want. Speckled spots, snowflakes, stars, whatever. You can make any pattern you want to here. And then when you bring it into immediately open Photoshop, they're available as vector patterns. So yeah, that shoved a bunch of stuff all into one for not really having a plan. We looked at working between Fresco and Photoshop, how to use, what are these things called? Vector patterns, create patterns, and using those layer styles again. So sort of a review of things we've talked about before, but it's just kind of fun. So have fun, play around, and don't feel like you're stuck with the menus and the options that they give you. It's very easy to make your own. The one thing that we didn't do in here is talking about creating something with capture, but that was the last video, so you're going to have to go look at that. All right, you guys, it's getting kind of long for my just rambling today, so hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. You guys be well.